So I want to thank everyone for being here and Jinhua for organizing. I'm Dr. Alex Papanikolaou. I sit with the HIE and partly in the JRS. And we have a research continuity task force that we have with 15 students that Jinhua is part of. And this is one of the outputs that we've created with James's leadership, which is a fortnightly or 2 times a month tutorial about helping you guys get the most out of your PhD journey or your master's journey if you're doing a master's of research. So without further ado, I will pass it on to James to lead. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexi. Hi, everyone. I hope you can all hear me well. Alexi, give me the thumbs up because you're the last person I can see. Great. Yeah, look, thanks so much for joining us again. This is the 3rd one of these we've been running, and I've appreciated all your feedback and your thinking and your tips, and hopefully we can continue these. I think the biggest thing about, or the hardest journey or hardest part of a research journey, it can be a PhD or a master's, is often that you feel alone. And often you also suffer from what I call smart person syndrome. So to be at this stage in your career, you're smart, but the smarter you get, the more you progress, then the harder you feel it is to ask dumb questions. So you feel that I can't ask that because people will realize will realize I'm an imposter, or you'll feel like an imposter, or you feel that people won't think you're as smart as what they think you are. So this is a chance for us to make you sure that you don't feel alone, that you feel that you're part of a community. And when hopefully things get back to normal, we can be meeting face to face as well as doing some of this online. And also cover just informally to ask any question you want. And I will answer it, as I always say, as truthfully and honestly as possible, and including sometimes giving you bad news if that has to be said. So, and I'll also say that I may need to take a phone call at some point during this personal matter, but Alexi will and Yinghao will take over. So let's begin. And as we begin, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge, make an acknowledgement of country, and to recognise the fact that we have, we're in an amazing country, and we had 220 nations of Aboriginal people living here before colonial imperialist processes began, and especially our university is on an area which is very wealthy, very full of wealthy amount of knowledge, and I want to acknowledge the amazing culture that is the First Nations culture of this country. Just a reminder that these meetings are about teaching you about the culture of research. If you went and lived in a country for 3 years, if you got up and you know, this is for you international students, you will understand what I'm saying. But you know, for all of us, if we went and lived in another country, we would take time to learn some basic things about what the culture means, you know, about if there's, you know, ways to greet people, if there are specific ways or things that are accepted and not accepted, because you're entering a different culture, a different setting. And universities are a bit like that. Research culture within the university is foreign. It's not something that many of us are used to. And we don't actually think about it as being foreign because it's just part of the university, and we just come along and continue our learning journey. But it is something that we should be thinking about as a different culture. And so part of this is to socialize you to think about what it's like, what is expected of you as a researcher. No one told me. I learnt the hard way. I had a very difficult candidature, and so part of this is us wanting to make sure that you experience the many upsides of research and deal with the downsides, and there are always downsides, as best as you can, and again, you don't feel alone. And the rules are simple. I'll talk for a while, then we'll take some Q&A. I will answer questions honestly and truthfully, and I just expect everyone to be respectful. And if you have anything specifically to ask me, I can try and take things offline. So let's get into it. Let's get into discussion. So today I want to talk about managing your confirmation of candidature, or your CoC. And I want to talk about, I want to break it down into 3 parts. One is give you an overview of the CoC and what a confirmation of candidature document looks like. 2, I want to talk about the presentation and the process. And 3, I want to give you some tips. So what are the tips that I can give you about preparing and doing very well in your in your confirmation of candidature. So just a reminder that it's always you that's driving your thesis, okay? So you need to take charge of your thesis, but you need to also recognize that the confirmation of candidature is a key milestone. And so you need to make sure that you understand what is required of you and what that document and the presentation will achieve. It is when you turn up to do your presentation, the outcome should not be a surprise. You should be so well prepared that you should go there expecting to pass. When you go through that process, it's not a trick challenge. Someone's not trying to catch you out. What people want you to do is pass, but it all comes down to your preparation. And I'll talk about what you need to prepare to get there. So just quickly, a quick overview about what the confirmation of candidature is. It is the probably most important milestone of your PhD. It's done between 9 and 12 months from when you begin. And the Master of Research, they don't have a confirmation of candidature. You have a what is it called, Alexi? You do a
POP.
POP. That's right. Yeah. So it's a similar thing, right? You have to complete it successfully to go on to complete your PhD, and also you cannot proceed to ethics without passing your CoC. If you're going to get ethics clearance, your ethics can only be achieved once you complete your confirmation of candidature. Now, the good news about that is that much of what's required in ethics will be sorted out in the process of completing your confirmation of candidature. Okay, and so it's important to know that. Okay, so it is a formal and comprehensive process. So even though it's when I say formal, it means that it's actually formally recorded on your record, and it helps you make a plan to complete your thesis. If you're successful, what you achieve is to make sure that you make sure by your supervisors and also an independent expert, ensure that you're on top of the key literature. So there's no gaps, there's no specific areas that you're missing. You have a clear understanding of what your research questions are, and a significant part of your confirmation of candidature is finalising those research questions, making sure that they make sense, and then you have a very clear plan to submission. And if you think about it, if you complete your confirmation of candidature, say 12 months in, that means you're 1/3 of the way through your candidature. You've only got 2 years to go. And so the outline that you prepare from here going forward will be an outline that confirms that, clearly shows which direction you're going. So it's really important that this document is well prepared and gives you a very good direction where you want to go. Now, when the confirmation of candidature was first introduced, it was not taken that seriously. So a lot of people were just like, oh yeah, look, I'll just do it and I'll pass it. And some people did okay, and some people did well, and some people did poorly. But what we found was that those people that performed well in their confirmation of candidature went through and completed their thesis with confidence. Right? For those who did poorly at their confirmation of candidature, they struggled during the rest of their PhD, right? And so this is why we've made this such an important milestone, because it really does set the agenda for where you're going forward. And if you do not perform in this, and I'll explain the process later on, you may find that you're asked to either leave your PhD or actually drop down to actually scale down to a master's master's of research. So just be prepared that this is taken very seriously by your supervisor and the university.
Oh, Masters of Philosophy.
Master of Philosophy, sorry, not Master of Research. Thanks.
Like a mini PhD kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I want to say, and before I begin to give you a bit of a breakdown, is to say that here's a link to this guideline that's produced by the Graduate Research School. Is excellent guideline. It gives you all the information you need, and I suggest that if you have done and it's updated regularly, as you can see, it was updated in 2019, and I suggest that you do download that. The links are there, but if you need the link, it's easy to find. Just put Western Sydney University confirmation of candidature in any search engine and you will find it. So much of what I say is covered in that, but I will cover some of the key points. Okay, so the guide gives you an overview, and essentially what it does, what I should say is that the guide also makes a point that says that some disciplines have different requirements. So the overview is you know, it's accurate probably 90% of the time, but there may be some things, some disciplines that require additional have additional requirements. So make sure that you get your head around those and speak to your supervisory panel or to other PhD students. But again, there's not that many, but you should just be prepared for them. When you're doing your confirmation of candidature, it should be between 2,000 and 10,000. Most of them around 5,000 to 7,000. Again, it depends on your discipline. If you're doing a HAS-based discipline, it tends to be, you know, the social sciences or the humanities, it tends to be longer. If you're doing a science-based discipline, it might be a bit shorter. But again, it needs to be long enough to be a clear understanding of what you've achieved and where you're going. And then the other thing to say is, and I'll cover this in more detail, is that when you complete your confirmation of candidature, there's a document. That document is submitted. That document then is distributed amongst usually 4 or 5 people: your supervisors, the associate dean of research or high degree by research, and an independent scholar that attends your panel, and you present to them. So, but they need to read it before they turn up, and I'll talk about some of that detail in a moment. So what should it include? Well, it has these 9 basic elements, and I want to talk about each of those. So the first one is a project summary. This is a bit of an overview of what your project is about. So it's essentially in 500 to 1,500 words, you should be giving an overview about, you know, the background, the significance of your research, and your research approach. Now, my tip to you is often it's best to write this at the end. Even though it's the first thing that the readers read, because it essentially is an overview document, and you can write some overview points, but maybe you need to come back and make sure that you edit it so it covers what's written in the rest of the document. The second part of the document is to give some very a really solid research background about why what are the gaps in the literature, and also an overview. So this is one of the ways that this could be your literature review, where you talk about the various types of academic literature and where your research project fits in, what gaps you're following, and specifically the aims of what your research, your PhD or your master's is about. So what are you trying to achieve? So are you answering a question, solving a problem, testing a hypothesis, or trying to do a practical creative piece? So this is I suppose the literature review. You think about this as a literature review of the main part of your document. The third approach is to talk about your research approach. So what research activities are you going to take? What research disciplines are you going to join? Are you going to employ? Qualitative, quantitative, you know, and then break it down. Ethnographic, what type of ethnography are you going to do? What's, you know, provide some background about this research approach and why that is a research approach to answer the question that you've just outlined. So you've outlined what you're going to do in your background, and now you say, I'm going to solve this by employing this research. And you need to provide enough information so people understand that you know what research you're doing, okay, that you understand your research approach. Part 4 should be the significance of your research. So what is it that makes your research different? What is it that's going to be your original contribution to knowledge? Don't forget, a PhD and a master's is, you're assessed on that line. When someone asks, what is your original contribution to the knowledge in your discipline, right? And this is your chance to talk about that. So explain if it's about finding a gap, about providing an answer to a question that hasn't been asked yet, applying a technique to an area, a new technique to an area that's been established, or maybe applying an old technique to a new area. Whatever it is, you need to be able to outline the significance of your research, because ultimately your PhD will be assessed on if you're contributing new knowledge to the discipline. And that's important. And you should be able to identify what you think your significance of your research is at this point. Okay, finally, part 5 is an outline. So it's a breakdown by a chapter with a short description of what each chapter is. Okay, so, you know, you might sit there and say, I want to have 7 chapters, and you begin to break down each one of those chapters. What, you know, you provide sort of a short paragraph summary of each of those chapters. Now, it might seem like very early on to start doing this. And of course, as you progress through your thesis, you will alter, you may well alter these chapter outlines, and you may alter the direction, or you may have more chapters or less chapters. But what's important is at this point, you should at least have some direction of where your research is going and what the outline of your thesis will look like. So for example, you might sit there and say, you know, first part, chapter 1, introduction, chapter 2, literature review, chapter 3, detailed discussion of methodology, chapter 4, results, chapter 5, 6, and 7, discussions of outcomes. Now, the reason I make that point is because your methodology might be a really important part of your thesis, so it deserves its own chapter, and you should know this by now if you've got an innovative methodology. When I did my PhD, I didn't really have a methodology section because my PhD was essentially a theoretical PhD. So I had most of my work was in philosophy, and so I had a very brief section. Okay, timeline from here to submission. This is important again that you do this seriously, because then you can check back regularly to see how you go, especially as you enter your second and your third year, to see if you're progressing. This part's also important to think about if there are any resources or training that you might need. Usually what we do is say, are there conferences you want to attend? Given the fact that COVID is cancelled a lot of conferences or put a lot of conferences online, obviously it's something that you it'll impact that, but there might be a program that you might need to use, or accessing other informational resources. And again, this is where you should talk to your supervisor about what those resources. 8 is a budget. So start thinking about what costs of those resources are, and if you have specific need for your budget. And don't forget, the university, even now, is still quite generous in the Candidature funds it offers students, but obviously it will be more stringent in the way that it assesses your applications. Just be aware of that. And finally, a list of references. So look, that's what a confirmation of candidature document looks like. Usually what happens is once you complete that confirmation of that document, you submit it to your supervisor, usually at least a week before you have a confirmation of candidature meeting. Okay. Now, once your supervisors get that, they'll distribute it to your supervisory panel. So the 2 or 3 people or 4 people that are part of your panel. The higher degree research director or the associate dean of research, whichever one your school or institute has, and an independent scholar. And that's important. Now, that independent scholar could be someone else from the university, or it could be someone from outside the university. And that's really, really important that it's an independent comes in, because you always run the risk of, when you're working on something, even your supervisors run the risk of having a narrow view and not catching something or not seeing a gap. And by having an independent, at least one independent scholar come in and listen to your presentation and assess your work, then they can identify anything that you're missing out on. They can, they can identify weaknesses or any points that they see are important. So I hope that makes sense. Alexis, that all made sense? Cool. So I want to go through how the meeting runs. So what happens is you turn up to your meeting, say it's at midday on a Monday afternoon, and usually takes about an hour and a half. So usually it happens, you turn up to the meeting. A lot of these have been happening on Zoom online, but if you do it face to face or on Zoom, it runs exactly the same way. So usually there's a short welcome and introduction. And then the meeting is chaired by the HDR director or the associate dean research, and then they will pass it over to you to present. You are usually then asked to present for 15 to 20 minutes. You obviously can use a series of slides, and your presentation is then is an overview of the area of what you're talking about your research. Now, one of the things I always say is one of the best ways to begin that presentation is to give a bit of background about yourself and why you're approaching this topic. Is it something that is a personal passion for you? Is it something that's important in your community? Is it a gap that you identified during your undergraduate? Just a little bit of background about why you're pursuing this, because that helps give a context to the research that you're undertaking. So that takes about 15 or 20 minutes. And then there's a chance for a Q&A or a discussion. So what usually happens is a chair will ask first the independent people present to ask any questions of you, or to ask you to clarify something, and then your supervisors may ask something of you. And look, and I will say this is one of the most interesting parts. It is a really positive discussion. Because rarely do you get in your academic career a chance for 4 or 5 people to sit around and concentrate on your work in this detail and to give you feedback. So it sounds scary, but it actually is a really positive experience. Now, once that happens, and that can take again anywhere between 5 to 15 or 20 minutes, you are asked to leave the room, or if it's a Zoom presentation, to leave Zoom. And then your panel and the scholars and the independent scholars and the chair will assess your presentation and your document. And again, this is not trying to catch you out. It's about talking about where they see some of the strengths and weaknesses are, and then they assess what outcome or what result they're gonna give you. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Once that happens, and that can take anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes. Do not freak out if you're sitting there for 20 minutes, right? It happens all the time. Students will often sit there and say, things like, oh my God, I've been waiting for 15 minutes, I've failed, or 20 minutes, I've failed. No, you haven't failed. It's just a conversation. You are then asked, you'll then be invited back and informed of the outcome, and then there's a discussion, and you're told what the outcome is, and I'll talk about what the possible outcomes are. And then your panel is asked to leave the room, as are the independent scholars, and the chair and you have a private discussion about your research journey, and they will want to know if you're doing well, if you have any issues, any concerns. It's a chance for you to raise any issues that you may not want to raise in front of your panel. And it's a confidential conversation. I am going to talk about a little bit more about the presentation in a moment, but Alexi, can you just, is anything else you want to cover? I just need 1 minute and I'll be right back, okay?
So we can just do the poll.
Yep.
So if guys, if you guys can complete this poll, then we have a little bit more data on how to progress with the forum, the Q&A. And thank you so much for all the questions that are coming in the Q&A. So please, oh, Yinghua, I'm having some issues. Do you mind if you take the lead and put the poll up?
Yeah, sure. So it's about the poll, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Is that on? Can you see it?
So if people can please fill it out in the next 60 seconds. You can select more than one. So shall we continue, Yinghua?
I think people are still voting.
Okay.
Should we?
Sorry, I can't see. I can't
Yeah,
see the
it's
results.
still voting. So.
Just take a screenshot of the results as well, because we use them
Okay.
when we.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Should I give it 10 more seconds and then we end the poll?
Shall we get going?
Yeah. So do we get started about the poll? Like,
I'll let James continue his presentation, and then
okay.
when he's ready, we can report the poll, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, should I continue? Okay. So yeah, look, I mean, I've spoken a little bit about the presentation. One of the things I wanted to say, about, there are times when you'll have two independent scholars on your poll if you have two different disciplines. So one of my students one of my candidates recently completed her confirmation of candidature, and she's looking at education and culture. And so, and so she had someone from cultural studies and someone with an education background. So it's important that, so there could be two people there, and that's fine. So there's don't stress about having more than one independent expert there. Okay, so I'll just continue now. So I've discussed a little bit So following your presentation, as I've mentioned, there'll be some clarifying questions. Do not feel intimidated by these. These are a really good chance for you to just, oh, have you thought about this and have you thought about that? And they might ask you things like, you might sit there and say, my case study involves 3 separate sites. And they might say, well, why did you pick those 3 sites? Or why haven't you thought about doing another site? And so just be prepared to explain or to justify your position. And these are really important questions. They're the kind of questions that you'll be asked at a conference or elsewhere. So so those questions actually will assist you in your journey. So now, okay. So the outcome, basically, you've got one of 4 outcomes. The first one is pass as is. So they'll turn around and they'll say, well, look, this is great. You did well. You've covered all the sections. We've got no changes. We want no changes. So you'll pass as is. The second outcome is to pass with just some minor changes. So it might be, you just need to clarify this a little bit more, or you need to update some definitions or something like that. You need more detail on your budget. Could be something as simple as that. The third one is to pass with more substantial changes. What happens is that means that you'll need to probably rewrite or add some significant sections. And so this could be, say, that you've missed, the independent person might say you've missed a whole section on your literature review, or they might find that your literature review isn't appropriate, or that you haven't really prepared enough on your confirmation on your methodology. And then the fourth option is you could be asked to redo it. So that means that you haven't passed it as it is, and that you have another chance to pass it. And if you do get 4, then you will be asked to resubmit the document and redo the presentation. And this is important that you know that this is either the first step in being asked to leave your research journey, or to scale down to a MPhil, Master of Philosophy. Now, if you're doing a master's, it's exactly the same outcomes. It's exactly the same process. You go through these steps as well, and these are the outcomes as well. Your supervisors, your primary supervisor will have a document, and they record that document, and everybody in the panel signs off on it, as do the independent people, and as does the chair, and you're given a copy of that document. So, like I say, when you go into a confirmation in Candidature, you should be thinking of nothing but one or 2, because you should be that well prepared that you shouldn't be surprised by anything that happens in that. Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 additional tips for preparing and for doing your confirmation of Candidature before just concentrate on the questions. Okay, the first one is to ask a friend or a colleague, another PhD student, to come in with you and to join you for the presentation. Now, this is important because you will be nervous, and when there's discussion, often you're preparing, you're thinking about how you're going to answer questions, and so having someone there not only makes you feel that you've got some support, it makes it feel a little bit more informal, but you can ask that person to take notes, so that way you can concentrate on the conversation and answering questions, and not concentrate on taking notes. Now, if you're doing it via Zoom, of course, you can ask to record the meeting, but still, having someone there, someone that you can also give you that level of support. And like I said, then afterwards you can have somebody to discuss it with, like, oh, I thought that part went well, and get some feedback from them as well, from someone that you trust. And I know students that have done that, candidates that have done that, and they've been really, really happy with that. It makes it feel like more of a supportive environment. The second part is the confirmation of Candidature is a significant milestone, and I know a lot of people want to rush to it and get there and get it out of the way as quickly as they can. And yeah, I understand that, but you are better off taking your time and getting it right, and making sure that you get through this really confidently than to rush it and to struggle through it. And this is important because sometimes there's background information that you need to get your head around, especially if you're entering a different discipline. So for example, if your discipline is in sociology and you're doing a PhD in cultural studies, then there are some words and some concepts that are different and that you need to take time to make sure that you have the approach. So even though it's great to want to rush this milestone out of the way, do slow down a bit and think, okay, what do I need to do to get this right? And it might take an extra few weeks than what you intended to take, but that's fine. You're better off doing it, taking slower and getting it right. Step 3 is prepare. You have to make sure that that document that you write is very, very good. It's very strong, and that it should not, that means that the outcome would not be a surprise. And this is why you might need multiple drafts. And sometimes I get it, multiple drafts are really frustrating. And I don't want to rewrite this section again. Oh, I don't want to do it. It's driving me crazy. But in saying that, by preparing properly, that means when you turn up, you can submit that document with a lot of confidence. And that document is also the document that could be used for your ethics, and also could even be the outline of an article. So it is worth making sure that you prepare. Document 5. Point 4 is to practice your presentation. Just practice it a few times so you're confident. If you are going to give a bit of background about yourself and talk about what drove you to this point of research, then you should be aware about what you want to say and how you want to say it, and also be prepared about what points you want to emphasize. Practicing in front of your friends, in front of your family. I know sometimes it can feel awkward and embarrassing, but it's really, really important that you practice. So again, you don't get too, so when you're presenting it flows much easier. And five, I know this, oh, sorry, the last one, that should be 5. The last one is to enjoy it as much as you can. It is very rare in your academic career, in your research journey, that you will have 4 or 5 people sitting and being focused only on your research journey, right? And it is a real privilege to hear people's opinions of what you're doing and get their feedback, and to be, to have a chance to really engage with that. And so think about it as a conversation. It is a very important milestone, very formal, and the university takes it very seriously, but the process itself is a really important learning journey, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of it. So that's it for me. I will stop my screen share, and I'm happy to talk about what the poll said, as well as to take any questions or any themes. Alexi, Yinghao.
Thank you so much for that. So just a reminder that the Q&A is going to be anonymous. So we are going to just read out your question for you without your name. But first, the poll. What is the biggest challenge with passing your CoC? And you can pick more than one. 23% of you said inconsistent comments. 7% of you said infrequent meetings with the whole panel. 33 of you said that it was unclear what to expect. So hopefully James's presentation is helping a little bit on that. 27% that you had a conflict with the priorities, right? Am I doing an experiment, or am I doing research, or am I doing reading, or am I writing my CoC? 20% of you said that you feel unsupported, and I would love to unpack that if we have time. And 17% of you put it on the Q&A, and 20% of you said you actually have no issues, which is fantastic to hear. James, do you have any comments?
Yeah, look, I think, I'm really glad that the issue around being not sure about what's expected, hopefully we've solved that. We talked last week about inconsistent comments from your or last time we met, talked about inconsistent comments and how to deal with that in your panel. So if you weren't here for that, I do suggest that you access the recording. We've got it recorded, and you sort of use some of the strategies for that. I think that's an important one. But yeah, hopefully this has helped identify what what's expected of your CoC and the process. And like I said, when you do go through the process, I know it feels a little bit intimidating, and that's why it's important to ask someone to come with you. I think that's worked really well for people who I know that have done that.
So shall we start with the questions? Yinghao, would you like to start?
Okay. So for the typical Word account for CoC that was mentioned, is that for all disciplinary schools?
Yeah, look, it's like I said, it's between 15, usually between 3 and 7, but usually no less than 2 and no more than 10. So that's a massive amount of gaps. But again, just it could be. I mean, if you're say doing music, or mathematics, then what you submit might be a lot shorter than that, you know. And so yeah, so just be aware about be aware of that discipline, and it will vary, and your supervisors can guide you on that. The question is, how much information do you think is important to be able to share, to make sure that people are confident, you know, that you've displayed how much progress you've made?
So what if your dissertation is to test a hypothesis, and then at the end your hypothesis is not really successful, or is only slightly successful? Does it actually count towards your mark? Is there basically a link between what you said in your CoC and what you identified?
Yeah. So look, what's important for you to realize is once you get through your CoC, that is a historical document. And the most important part of that is the timeline and the overview that you've put together, right? So no one really will remember your CoC and what you said you're going to do, because your thesis will change over the 2 years. It will take some different direction, and that's fine, because the more you find out, the different you'll start going down different directions. Look, the point is, if you're testing something and it's only partially successful, the point is then how do you frame that for your examination, your examiners, right? Your examiners aren't going to go back and check your CoC. What they're going to do is say, you said you're going to test this, and you thought you were going to find this. You actually found something different. So they're going to assess you on your method, your process, right? And if your method and process are really, really, then you're going to be great. So it's not about the outcome, it's about the process that you followed, right? Because what you've done is you've proven, or you've confirmed, that hypothesis is incorrect. Alexi, you're more of a scientist than me.
The only thing I will add is that the examiner doesn't know what you said in your CoC. So you can have a separate CoC topic than your PhD, because there's 3 years in between, or 2 years in between. So it's totally normal to change your topic, as long as your supervisors are agreeing and supporting all that. And I think maybe that's a bigger problem to unpack, supervisor support.
Yeah.
But maybe we can go to the next question before touching that long.
Okay.
Okay. So I just started my PhD. Is it normal to feel lost at the beginning?
Yes. If you feel confident at the beginning of PhD, then something's wrong with you. I think is the best way to say it. Look, you know, I know you're gonna. I say this all the time, and people don't believe me. I have over 100 articles. I have 12 books. Every time I start a new research project, I feel lost. Okay, it's okay to feel lost. You want to feel. You always feel, and you will continue to feel like an imposter. You want to feel an imposter enough to motivate you to do good work, but not enough to paralyze you. So if you start feeling to the point where you're lost and you're paralyzed, then that's bad. The best way, I suggest that you go back and you watch the first couple of presentations that I did on this. They should help you. But begin by doing a lot of reading, do a lot of writing, and start listing what your research is about. It will change, but my suggestion is don't only read, but also write. Always write. Writing is thinking. even if you're reading. But yeah, it's normal to feel lost.
Is there any differences that you haven't mentioned between the Masters of Philosophy and the PhD?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's the two obvious differences are both the timeline and the length, and there's less, I suppose, the contribution of knowledge requirement in the Master of Philosophy is not as stringent as it is for the PhD. But the processes that I've outlined here are pretty much the same. A lot of people will enter the MPhil with the idea of as a way to access the PhD later on. So if that is your intention, that then just be prepared to follow those same processes. But again, with an MPhil, the timeline of the CoC is about the same as well.
Okay. So if I have two supervisors from two different disciplines, for example, one from science and one from law, does that require two different independent scholars as well?
Yeah, look, I would suggest that would be a good idea in your situation. That would be really, that would be good, because what you want is people from those different angles. What often happens is, even if someone has like say you're looking at this, a scientist, a lawyer who works on certain scientific developments, the point is if they're based in the School of Law, they're not going to be as up to date. They're going to be they generally look at things from a law perspective. So having two different experts can help. It's not always the case, but I think I mentioned before with the candidate I'm supervising, she had someone from cultural studies and someone from more of an education background, and that really helped them in the conversation that we had. It was really, really positive, and she was able to direct the two people were able to give her literature from different backgrounds, and that helped a lot.
So if your CoC has external panel members or internal panel members, what's the expectation that, how would they contribute to your PhD moving forward? And also sometimes how does it actually happen, regardless of the expectation?
Yeah, look, I think it's usually when you have an additional panel members, people will come along to your CoC because they're interested in the topic, and then they'll generally be pretty generous if they're there and they want to be part of the conversation. Then what will happen? Turn around and say, feel free to call me, or I'll send you some information, and then maybe you can follow them up and ask them to have a cup of coffee and to chat about some of the points that they made. So it is a way that they can be used as an additional sounding board. I think I mentioned before, I think I mentioned last time that when I was supervising someone, probably about 7, 8, 9 years ago, when she did her confirmation of candidature, it was at that point it was decided that she was trying to do too much, and so she should narrow it. And so when she narrowed it, one of the conversations we had is that I was no longer as relevant on the panel. So it was agreed that I should step off, and one of the independent experts ended up joining the panel. So that can also happen, that the independent expert could say, yeah, look, I'm keen on joining the panel. So it's a really good way to kind of assess for the panel as well, to assess how they're going. And that's really important, that the panel also uses this. The independent expert is also important for your panel, because when I'm supervising someone, I'm also always worried that I've missed something important. Like, I'm always worried. And so having someone as an independent expert coming along and saying, hey, this is really great, they're on the right track, and they'll often say, have you thought about this, or have you got them to read this? And you're like, actually, no, I missed that, or I forgot that, or I didn't make that connection. So that is also a check for me to making sure that as a supervisor, I'm giving the right amount of support or the right amount of advice to the candidate.
Okay, so English is my second language. So in my presentation, what are the tips or things I should consider?
Yeah, look, practice is really important. That's my biggest thing. Look, if English is your second language and you struggle presenting in second language, you can begin by saying, okay, I want to begin. If that was me, I would begin by saying, everyone, I just want to say that, thank you for being here, and so on. So I do, English is my second language, and I do get nervous. And when I get nervous, I can make some mistakes. So, but let me know. So don't be scared to say that. I mean, we're a multicultural, lingual university, and not everyone is going to have comes from an English speaking background. So don't be scared to say that you're a bit nervous, and if you're nervous, then obviously makes it presenting. But I will say practice with your friends, practice in front of different people. Don't just practice with people that speak the same background language as you. I always, when I was doing my first series of presentations, I used to present to my mum because her English wasn't very good. And I figured if my mum understood what I was saying, anyone would understand what I was saying. So it's important to practice with different people.
That's great. That's great advice. If I practice with my mom, then she'll start giving advice.
Yeah. And well, my mum's advice was always, "Why aren't you married?" I am married now, so she stopped giving me that advice.
So what is the role of the actual literature review for this CoC?
Yeah, look.
What's a good one and what's a bad one?
Yeah, look.
For a CoC.
Look, a literature review serves a number of purposes, right? So first of all, it shows that you understand all the background research or literature that's in your area. The second, and that you're widely read, so you're reading it. The second is that review is one that identifies key themes, right, within your literature. So what you do is you've got to think of literature review as having a conversation. So for example, in your literature, sorry guys, can you just hang on a minute?
I can pick one up that, oh, he's back.
Okay, sorry, I'm back. So a good literature review is one that basically says, look, the literature, like I'll give you an example in my literature. When it comes to citizenship, which is what I study, I say literature in citizenship studies tends to follow three broad areas. The first group of literature is around, say, citizen as a political tool. And this comes from from political theorists, and the key theorists are people like, and I'll go and explain them and what they talk about and why it's important. And then the second group of is citizenship from a legal perspective, and the key legal theorists in sociology that talk about citizenship are, and I talk about what they talk about. And the third area is around citizenship as a social practice, right? Then what you do is, then what you say is, my work fits here into this area, right? These are the strengths of this group. These are the weaknesses of this group. These are the strengths of this other group and their weaknesses. My research fits into this area. This is where I situate my research. My research sits between these three different groups because it's looking at research as a cultural phenomenon, not just a social phenomenon. So then you begin to unpack it. So what makes a good literature review is that it covers the key literature or the key arguments into very clear themes, and then where you situate yourself, right? That's what makes it good. Where you situate yourself in the themes is show where you see yourself as a scholar. So this allows you then to build up and saying, my research looks at citizenship from a cultural perspective. That is, why do we feel, why do we feel empowered? Why do we feel engaged? And I will draw on these other schools by looking at their, at key themes that emerge. But mine is specific in this way. So that's what makes a good literature review. It summarizes the key areas of research and allows you to situate where your perspective sits. Does that make sense? Was that a good, was that a good summary?
Yeah, I think so. So related to that question is whether my literature review needs to be completed, because some of the supervisors says it's not. It's about setting up the context about your research, a gap. But some of them, they expect it to be a little bit more like, a chapter in the whole thesis. What's your suggestion on that part?
So I think, look, in some ways it's going to depend on your research paper, on your thesis. I think you want to get it as close to completed as possible, right? And so that's my advice. So you're not And so, yeah, so I would, and that way, when you're presenting it to the independent assessor or independent panel members, they know they can then give you advice if there are still gaps, right? That's what's important. It allows them to have insights to see if there are gaps.
So I'm going to ask you a process question. I don't know if you have to go at 2 p.m. or if it can take longer.
Yeah, I was kind of, but ask me one more question and then I'll.
Because I can answer some of the other ones, but the process one that I probably cannot is it possible to transition from MPhil to PhD, or do you really have to reapply?
No, you can transition. So what will happen is when you do your MPhil, you should be having this conversation with your supervisors, and when you complete your CoC, your MPhil CoC, they can make that recommendation, and with support of the Associate Dean of Research, you should have trouble transitioning. If you do well in your CoC, and your supervisors and the panel members and the Associate Dean of Research all agree, then it should be very easy for you to get in there.
Great. We have another 8 or so, but I can try them if you have to go, or I can ask you.
Yeah.
To you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to go, but yeah, so if I can leave it with you.
I really appreciate your time, and if I don't know any of them, we'll put them on email list, and
yeah, please do.
We'll send them out to you, and then you can reply to everyone.
Thanks everyone for being. I hope you got something out of it, and I really always enjoy chatting to people. Okay, thanks both. Thank you so much for your work here.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
So, Yinghao, if you want to ask me the question, I'll try to answer it from my knowledge of the HDR process.
Okay, sure. What major time frame do we have to present? I have my presentation like in 10 minutes, and my panel was unsupportive. Presented for just 10 minutes, and they didn't even bother about my thesis and about what they want to say. Again, no private discussion with the HDR director as suggested. What happens where all those questions are changed, even where my supervisors justify the reason for them?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. I'm not really sure I understand the last one, but I'll start from the beginning. It sounds like the person running your CoC didn't do it properly. So you should have been advised for how long you're supposed to present. We usually at my institute present for half an hour, but that depends on the school and the institute. The panel is meant to have read your document. They are not just there to just listen to what you present. They are supposed to have read your document from beginning to end, and they're meant to have made comments. And so everyone is prepared, including the external examiner and the member of the HDR committee. If you had no private discussion with the HDR director, that means or his delegate or her delegate, because there could be someone else that's appointed to chair the committee, that means that the process didn't work, and you really need to tell the GRS that this happened and tell us the context of why it happened so we can investigate. The other suggestion I always give to people is to practice the presentation with your friends, but also make sure that your supervisor gets a copy of your PowerPoint and has at least 1 week to give you comments. So really highly recommend that you work with your supervisor, not against them. If you're having problems working with your supervisor during your CoC, you will have problems for the next 3 years. So you may want to consider that and talk to the HDR director or the GRS if you're having problems.
Okay. Could you share with us some tips to help with writing the CoC document?
I hope James gave you the best tips that he can give. I don't know if the person asking the questions from sciences, but we always ask in my institute, we always say the supervisor has the best knowledge of the discipline. So ask the supervisor, what is the structure you would like my CoC to look in? And put that in an email. So if it's verbally, then when you go back to your desk, write an email, say, thank you, dear supervisor, this is what we agreed the CoC will look like. And then you have a written record of how you want the CoC to be structured. because the supervisor will be the biggest critic, but also your biggest friend. So having them early on board is really important. And because you can have a written record, if anything goes wrong, you can always show, well, this is what we agreed on. If you change your mind or you forgot, please read this. And my advice here is to never be aggressive, never be confrontational, never be adversarial. Just be friendly. And if they are being aggressive, maybe something is wrong in their life, right? So just be acknowledging that a lot of supervisors may have a lot of students, or they may have problems at home. They might be stressed for no other reason. Don't take it personally immediately. If you do think it's becoming personal, then again, we're going to a different topic, but talk to your associate dean or your HDI director or the GRS if that doesn't work.
Okay, so if I'm asked to redo my CoC, isn't my supervisor also get a really bad outcome? And why do they ask me to go for CoC in the first place?
So the answer is no. The supervisor is not judged by your performance. You are the scholar. It's your PhD. It's your research master's or your master's of philosophy. It's your document to own. Your supervisor is there to advise you, to help you. They're not owning this document, you are. What may have happened is the supervisor thought it was a really good document, but the external examiner didn't. And that is how the process has to work. The external examiner is independent of your supervisor. They give a judgment to make sure that your work is good, not just for your supervisor, but for the rest of the field. So don't take it as a failure that if they ask you to make changes, take it as input. And I understand it can be quite stressful. It is stressful writing the document and then being told, go back and write again. But one way to overcome that is to make sure you work with the rest of your panel. So not just your primary supervisor, but your secondary supervisor as well. And give them enough time. So make sure that you give the document well in advance so they have time to kind of really read it.
Okay. So I'm preparing my CoC and I feel like it's much longer than 10,000 words, maybe between 20,000 to 25,000. How to shorten the CoC document effectively?
Oh my God. So not just your supervisor, but also your examiner and the rest of the panel have to read the CoC. If you give them 20,000 words, they have to read 20,000 words. Now remember, the things they're actually looking for are very specific. There are 5 points, and they're also in the GRS document that James put on the slides, and we're going to make available. And Yinghao put it on the chat. So the 5 points are: you have a question for every chapter. That you actually have a hypothesis you want to test. You have enough background that the hypothesis is valid. It's a good hypothesis, it's interesting because this is what the background is. The third part is you have a timeline. You actually say, what are the resources that you need and how you're going to achieve that in 3 years with the money that you have made available, not with extra money, not with like a unicorn, like on my t-shirt, delivering you gifts, but with actual real things that you have within 3 years. Then you have to write the method. You have to write the method because people want to understand. Not that you can do the method necessarily in your CoC because it's quite early still, but you know what you need to learn. They want to know that you know what you need to know, if that makes sense. And finally, they want to have a discussion at the end. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just to see what the big picture is. You have different chapters. How do they all bind together? At the HIE, and this could be different for every school and institute, that's why you have to talk to your supervisor or associate deans. We always look at the first chapter, or at least one chapter, to be really well developed. It has a really good introduction, a really good methodology, and it has a good impact statement. But we don't really look for the other chapters to be as developed. We just want you to have a good idea of what they are, but we know that this is the beginning of your journey. We know that you will develop it. So what it sounds like with 20,000 words is you've gone and really explored your entire PhD and put it in writing for everything. So my suggestion is to ask your supervisor, dear supervisor, do you mind if we cut down the CoC document for the exam and just have one chapter that's really well developed and the rest is less developed, And if my examiner asks for more questions, I can say, well, I do have a longer document if you want to see it. That's my suggestion, but always talk to your supervisor for advice for that.
Okay, so I'm going to have my CoC presentation in 3 weeks. Can you give me some suggestions on, you know, in what ways to present my CoC report, and also because it's only 20 minutes, and how to deal with the panel's tricky questions?
So you really will only have 20 minutes plus questions, so half an hour. Really start with the big picture. Why you're there, what is the question? What is the questions you want to ask for your chapters? You don't have to talk about what the methodology is, because you can say in my report, I say what the methodology is, but this is what I need. This is the resources I need, and this is how I'm gonna do it. And this is, and the other thing I suggest is to put some possible answers. So if your hypothesis is a true or false, if it's true, what does that mean? If it's false, what would you do? If your hypothesis is more of a continuous variable, like, you know, what is the height of the average Australian, depending on the ethnic background, you can say, well, if I find these results, it might lead to those questions. And if I find those results, might lead to the other questions. Now, another trick I always ask people to add is a classic question that the panel puts. So you put it preemptively is, what happens if an experiment does not work out? What happens if an investigation does not work out? What happens if your fieldwork in China does not work out? So you'll say, if this doesn't work out, my plan is to explore this instead. They don't expect you to have it very well developed, your backup plan, your plan B, but they want to see that you have a plan B if something goes wrong. It's a classic question that a lot of panels ask, say, okay, so what happens if coronavirus comes and you cannot go and travel? They could have asked that 6 months ago, obviously without the word coronavirus. Now, how do you deal with panels' tricky questions? With a smile. They're not there out to get you. They're not there to destroy you. Maybe some of them have this in their, you know, very small minority may have that, but again, you can smile to them. You'll say, you don't have to say it, but basically it's a good question. I have the answer, or I don't have the answer. I need to think about it. Let me get back to you. That's my suggestion.
Okay, I think for social science, we normally have this kind of tricky question about you know, ethic considerations, because it's about people and sometimes about vulnerable kind of research groups or communities. So how do you deal with that? So those kind of ethics related questions, we normally have to really consider that in advance. So just prepare yourself if anything related to ethics. And so for example, just Alexis mentioned about coronavirus. So how the methodology may be impacted because of that. You cannot, you know, just go out and recruit people. And what if you put those kind of people in vulnerable kind of situation? So yeah, just have to practice and think in advance what kind of, you know, if you are the people like sitting on the panel and you look at your own project, what are the things you may think of and ask? So yeah, that's
absolutely. And
yeah.
And ask another PhD student as well to see your presentation and ask you questions, especially if they've passed the CoC. Just tell them, you know, critique me, because this is the academia. You have to be critiqued and you have to stand on your own 2 feet. But it's okay if you don't know the answer. Just say, I'm not really sure, but maybe this, or I don't really know. I haven't thought about it, but you know, off the top of my head, maybe that. That's the kind of interaction people are looking for.
Okay, so the next question will be like, I have 3 supervisors already. How many people will join on my CoC presentation?
So first of all, the CoC can be public, so anyone can join the CoC to look at it, but they don't have to be a member of the panel, which is the panel that meets afterwards and asks you questions in private. But anyone can join the CoC and ask questions. So you can bring all your friends as well. But during the meeting where they might ask you harder questions in private, it will be your supervisors, it will be at least one external examiner, and it will be at least one member of the HDR committee of your school or institute, usually the HDR director or a delegate.
Okay, so the final question will be, what kind of documents should I submit for my CoC?
Yeah, so go to the document that Yinghao has sent on the link. And your HDR director will have the relevant documents. So there will be a bit of paperwork. You just fill that out, send to your supervisor, they sign it. It might now be e-forms. Every semester we change it. So I'm not going to give you the answer because every semester changes. So please look at the guidelines, and you really have to learn to be independent with checking these kinds of requirements. Don't expect your supervisor to do it for you. Okay, 15 minutes over.
Yeah, that's all for today's Q&A. So Alexis, the poll is already being answered by quite a lot of people. If you haven't,
can you take a screenshot because we might lose it?
Yeah. So if you haven't give any please check the poll, and this is the way to help us to improve our coming sessions and help us better plan this as well.
Thank you. And the reason we don't run it as a Zoom meeting is because it will take much longer if everyone can see their faces. And also we want to have people anonymous questions because we want James to give an honest answer, and we don't want anyone to be judged. So no one knows who the question was. And we asked James without anonymously. So, and we also record it, so we don't want people to know who was on. So thank you so much for coming.